The views expressed in this presentation are those of the host and guests and do not represent the views of any lodge, Grand Lodge, appended body, or any other person or persons whomsoever.
Brethren, we are at Refreshment.
And I think that's it that Marty talked me into.
The greatest story of how you got interested in masonry.
Add a bottle or 2 bottles, beer, whatever you want.
The 33rd degree is really cool.
All you gotta say was lapel pin or chairman's coin.
Need to do this reduction plan of like what's really important.
It's nice. The grotto's more family oriented too, so that helps for sure.
Yeah. All right.
Love you guys.
Love you.
We're at Refreshment Masonic University.
Hey, Brock.
Hey, what's up, man? How are you?
Good to see you again. It's been 6 months now.
Yeah. What's up, dude? How have you been?
Good. It's been a wild ride. I can't believe it feels like it's been like a year since that trip.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, hanging in there. Been working today, and it's not raining for once, so it's nice right now.
Yeah,
it's been raining on and off here all day. I don't know. Has it been raining by you, Brock? I know you're not super far, but
yeah, it has.
You follow the page. I know you just said you haven't seen the show. We're pretty easy going. We're not going to give you any kind of hard questions. And
I'm ready.
Yeah, no, I'm good. Kyle, you ready to go?
Yeah,
right,
absolutely.
I'll start this off. Welcome to the At Refreshment Masonic Video Podcast. I'm your host, Wesley Reuter, here on Zoom, and I've got a guest with me, Kyle Grafstrom, and we have the infamous Brock.
What up? Confirmed.
All right. Well, Kyle, you wrote a book, and that's why you're here with us on Zoom to talk about that. But first, tell us a little bit about yourself. What lodge are you from, and or where you hail from, I guess is the proper term.
Sure. So I'm a past master of Verity Lodge here in Kent, Washington. And we're like 30 minutes south of Seattle, if you've ever been to Seattle. And I'm a Scottish Rite Mason, and I've been a Mason since about 2009. Okay. Yeah, stuck around. I've seen many schisms and changes, but I'm glad to still be a Mason and be a part of this fraternity.
We're great to have you, man. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. I greatly appreciate it. Now, you met Brock at the Valley of Chicago a couple months back, or 6 months back, I should say.
Yeah, correct.
Did they have you there for the book? Well, you two talk about that. You guys met first.
Yeah, go ahead and tell them, kind of how the Valley reached out to you, or.
Yeah. So the funny thing is about this book is, I was told a while back that books are different. And if you've never written a book, you don't even know what the life of the book is going to do. And this is a perfect example, is I get an email one day from I don't know if she's the PR or something there at Chicago Valley. And she's like, would you like to come out here and speak at our event? And I was like, yeah, I'd love to go to Chicago. And my cousin lives there, so I've been there before. And that's kind of how it goes. And I just said, yes, I'd love to go for the adventure. And so next thing I know, I was flying out there, and that's how we met that night. You were shooting pictures of the event, and then we chatted afterwards. And
absolutely,
it was a very, very, very cool event put on by that Valley.
Yeah, absolutely. That was Deb from the Valley of Chicago. Yeah, she does a lot. She usually reaches out and tries to do really amazing stuff for the reunions and stuff like that. So, yeah, it was like part of the whole theme of the reunion and everything to have you come out and do the book and the talk and everything. And man, afterwards I was like, holy cow, that is amazing to know, like, how crazy in the early 1800s, how much settlement was there, how much people were moving, and you don't really think about, that area of the country, until like Gold Rush and Oregon Trail and that kind of, then you start thinking, or even like back to Lewis and Clark, you think of the the expedition and all that, but you don't really think of the vastness of the, some of the topics that we'll get into here about your book or whatever. It's very entertaining, and the communication between the people and stuff like that. Hearing about that, it was just like, wow, this is absolutely amazing Freemasonry.
I'll just say this: I wrote the book, and as I was writing it, I'm like, this should be a movie. It does everything like a Spielberg movie could be.
Yeah, I could see it being a movie. There are a lot of history in this. Most of it I didn't know, especially from a Freemason point of view. What prompted you to write this? And why the Wild West? Not just Freemasonry in general, but why the Wild West with Freemasonry?
I would say the initial spark was I was going through my lodge records, and we had this big safe like buried in the back of our closet. I started going through the stuff in there, and a lot of it was junk, like literally receipts and stuff that's just pointless and not valuable. But then I got back to like the late 1800s for my lodge, and these were like petitions and plural membership things. And I kept noticing a trend of people coming from like Missouri and just certain states where they were mainly coming from. And so, again, I live in a suburb of Seattle, but I was like, well, where did these people come from? Like, why were they coming here at this time in the late 1800s? And then I started kind of pulling the thread out, and it was like, well, why did people come to Seattle? And then who were those people? Turns out not the founder, because there's not really a founder of Seattle, but one of the colorful characters that helped to establish the city of Seattle, he's actually coined with naming the city Seattle, was a Freemason. And then as I kept going down this list, it was like literally every town there was a mayor, or the first guy who like platted the town was a Mason, or the guy that defied the Hudson Bay Company and went north of the Columbia River into Washington State and settled there. He was also Mason. So there's this trend, and I'm like, man, this is a story. This is a story that's never been told. And I kind of kept going back and back, and then I realized my Grand Lodge put out a book like 100 years ago about this Oregon Trail story where the first charter was brought out. And so I just basically mashed all these stories together into what the book is.
Amazing.
Okay. This is a very beautiful book. I bought the hardcover, and just the pictures in it are just absolutely beautiful. I usually mark up books. Yeah. I usually mark them up, but
the oil paintings and like
I did not want to do that.
Yeah. The cool thing is there's no copyright because they're so old. So
yeah,
there's public records of all this stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, these are like the most amazing images, truly authentic perspectives of what it looked like out here.
Yeah. The oil paintings are just beautiful. And some of the old pictures, there's one I just came up with. I don't know if you could see that.
Yeah.
That one.
Yeah, the big salmon.
Very fascinating. So first off, how has your book been received amongst the Freemasons?
I mean, it's funny, like Masons. I'm a big fan of Albert Mackey, and he wrote, I don't know if you guys have ever read his thing called Masons Who Read and Masons Who Don't. It's a popular. I would Google that and find it. It's a pretty critical and harsh write-up about how there's so few Masons that actually read Masonic stuff. And he's kind of being like, what the hell is wrong with us? We're this group of men that are supposed to be enlightened, but we can't even read a damn book, And so people that buy the book like it, but then there's also people who scoff at the price because it's got all these pictures and stuff in it. It's $50, so that's well beyond the budget of a lot of Freemasons.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
usually when it gets like to 60, I'm kind of like, do I really want it, or can I settle for the soft copy? But I usually just end up purchasing the hard copy.
Yeah, if there's a hardcover, I'm getting the hardcover because it's going to last longer. It looks better on the bookshelf. And this is a beautiful looking book. The color, the cover, everything is just absolutely top notch. Great publishing work too. It is a really, really nice book.
Yeah, so it was published by a brother named Sean Iyer out of DC. And I don't know if you guys know him. He's like the curator or director of the Washington Memorial, and great brother. And I published a thing with him in Plumstone, or no, sorry, the Philalethes journal.
Very
cool. A little Masonic journal. And we became friends, and he's like, yeah, I'll publish your book. And I was like, oh, all right, let's do this.
Well, it's got amazing research, and kind of like get back into what we were talking about. You said these Masons that you were finding in these logs and why they were there, and that's one of the cool things about this is I didn't realize how much like beaver fur and all the animals and stuff that are here in North America and that aren't anywhere else in the world that have what would you say utility that these people were in high demand that people really wanted. And kind of reminds me of Wes when we did the moon Masons and we started finding so many Masons involved in NASA and space and this. And it's like, well, we were like, why would they be doing that? But the exploring and all of that, like there's something about Freemasonry, that develops these men that are willing to take on these like crazy achievable things, but just knowing that they can do it and then establishing Freemasonry alongside of what they're doing, and leaving it in their trail, and as you can kind of see that in the book and the forming of most of these cities, you find out that they had Masonic lodges before they were cities. They were well established before they were states and before that, and even like some of the borders, I remember one part in the book you were talking about the borders moving and this Mason going over the border to establish his own camp and this is where the best spot is. I want to be here. And then how they just reformed in new cities and that just became the new frontier there.
Yeah, and that's the guy that he crossed the border of the Columbia, which was effectively Hudson Bay Company, and I'm not saying that he established this territory for the US, but he certainly created a trend that caused Americans to go north of that border. And had that trend not happen, Washington State would be British Columbia. It would have stayed in the Canadian territory, and it would be totally different now.
And I don't know, we're kind of jumping all over the book here, but I was also thinking of where we were talking about the timeline on how long it took to get some of these charters out here to form the lodges and the weird paths and ways and how that even happened,
Yeah, the speed of Masonry has always been very slow.
That's for sure. Most of your book revolves around, well, maybe not revolves around, but it starts off and predominantly around John Jacob Aster. Who was he?
He was an incredible immigrant who came from Europe to New York City and was a self-starter who became one of the most powerful men in the world. And there still are areas in New York City, Astoria, New York. They named it that to attract him to go there, I think is the story. But he was an incredible man, and he got into the fur trade, just highly influential in that early time. And I'd say he's kind of like up there with Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk kind of ideas.
Yeah, it says in his bio he's an inventor, all kinds of stuff he did before Revolutionary War era, and then he goes into right into the fur trade and like pretty much runs a monopoly over all that. It was just amazing to see the empire this dude created.
Yeah, and his lodge is still open, like active lodge in New York City.
Yeah, and I seen he also was the grand treasurer of the Grand Lodge of New York. That was pretty amazing to see too. I'm like, wow, after all that, he became the Grand Lodge treasurer.
You know, that idea is probably the most biggest takeaway I got from writing the book was these Masons, they did so much. You know, not all of them, but some of these guys, their personalities were just like, they had their hands on everything. And it's just like so inspiring, the things that they could do with their lives. And it just makes me think, it makes me inspired to be more active. I'd say that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Kind of covered a little bit of it, but I guess I'll ask it. On page 10, you mention of something. Well, I didn't know. A group of men and the Scottish-born explorer named Alexander Mackenzie. In 1873, they successfully completed the first transcontinental crossing of North America, beating Lewis and Clark to the punch by 12 years. I take it this was a big factor in Jefferson's decision to purchase the Louisiana Territory.
Right. Yeah, and they're Canadians, so that's why we don't hear that story.
Is that why?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, that's taught in Canadian schools. Here, we're all about Lewis and Clark.
Right. But it's still history. I mean, it's still part of North America. I mean, Canada's part of North America, right? So
do you remember that the Chris Farley movie and Almost Heroes? You guys it's like a parody of Lewis and Clark. They're talking about the race, and they're supposed to be that first group, and then Lewis and Clark beats them at the end because they just have all these troubles. It's an awesome Chris Farley movie. Reading this totally, I'm like, dude, this is it. This is the movie right here. Is Almost Heroes for that.
Nice.
Yeah, that's a Chris Farley movie that got away from me. It sounds familiar.
It's like one of his last ones he did. Yeah.
All right.
He was making quite a few of that in that era.
Oh yeah.
Thank you, Brock, for jumping all over the place.
I know.
Okay, there was a big party that started trekking to the west, and it was called the Hunt Party.
Yes.
How many Masons were involved with that?
As far as I know, only Hunt was a Mason. His life, I mean, he's a very inspiring man. He was truly a leader till the day he died.
Well, that party had a lot of run-ins with Indians at that time.
Oh yeah.
Some were pleasant, some weren't. There's a rumor. Well, I don't want to say a rumor, but I guess from what I know, when they were tracking through, and others, maybe not particularly the Hunt Party, that they would do a certain sign to let them know that they were friendly. And you kind of hint about this in your book. How did you come across that?
I don't know about a specific sign, but the way I would think about it is it was very intuitive. You know, when you would approach a tribe or even a member or a group of Indians, you would, because you don't speak the same language, you have to do it very intuitively. So it's like, you gesture, you're doing a lot of body language. Like, imagine if we didn't speak the same language and we meet each other in the wilderness and we both have weapons.
Mm-hmm.
It's you kind of just figure it out as you go, I think. And when you're trying to survive, you know the custom would be you offer them gifts, and gifts are naturally disarming, and they communicate your intentions to the other party.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't imagine traveling like that and coming across so many different groups of Indians, and then them all speaking so many different languages. And I know they brought some people along as translators and to help, but I mean, you're not going to know everything. You're coming across new land and new areas. So yeah, to know customs and like stuff like that would definitely, because the Native Americans probably had different customs. And what I know, there was also a thing in there about like Native American secret societies as well, like how the Indians would share some of these mysteries with the explorers coming to that area too.
Yeah, I mean, surely would be like a great honor if they were showed some of that stuff. And again, I think it's just if they showed respect to the people they met, that would be reciprocated.
Oh yeah. I was like, oh, isn't there a Scottish Rite degree named after this? But you guys are a little different than us. Do you guys have that an Indian degree in your Scottish Rite degrees.
Oh yeah, because you're northern jurisdiction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
Right.
I'm like, wait a second, you probably haven't seen this, but we have a little bit of something like that in one
I
of
don't
our
think so.
Scottish Rite degrees. You know, when the Native Americans wanted to become Masons, you know, when they seen other Masons and held that in regard and wanted to become Masons themselves.
Yeah, here I think it's the 24th degree, but I don't know if that's in all of the northern area or if that's just our valley, because we changed the 19th degree here, or at least in our valley, a couple years back, and we now call it the Cowboy Degree.
Yeah.
So it's completely different from the southern jurisdiction. So they kind of ran with that, or not this past, maybe it was the past reunion, where everything was Wild West. So all the degrees, everyone was dressed up in some sort of Western getup.
Yeah, and I think that's like a special thing. When they redid the 4th degree, they left it with a little bit of interpretation, I think, and then the Valley of Chicago's really kind of taken a hold of that. And I know some of the directors, Stanley and stuff, he's done a great job, really, you know, giving it a new life and exploring it to where it, you know, where it can be presented and done that way. And the way they have it set up, I remember they did it in a video degree first, right, Wes? They did the video degree like that, and then
are you talking about the 19th or the 24th?
oh yeah, no, the Cowboy degree. I'm still on that one.
No, okay. That
I remember I seen it in video in Danville, and then I was like, that was the first video degree I'd ever seen. And then we seen it again when we went to Madison. Remember they did
yeah.
They did the Indian degree in Madison too, or not the Indian degree, the Cowboy degree in Madison, but they did it in the lodge room as a one-off degree in there.
Yeah.
Very cool.
As far as I know, and I could be 100% wrong, our valley changed it, and it was set up on like Back to the Right night or Thursday night at the Right, something like that. And it was first performed by Omar Ali. And it was something new, that it was probably about 6-7 years ago now.
Yeah.
It's a new writing of the 19th degree. So I believe it was us that started that.
I remember the video degree. I think there was a bunch of hubbub about it being like somebody from the valley and having a lot of local pride in that video.
Yeah, we've got a
guy starring in it, I think, and
there's a number of guys from our valley that went out to record a number.
There are a bunch of those video degrees. Yeah, it's Chad Lasix in one too, I think.
Now, being Southern, you don't have any video degrees, do you? Or is that something they put in?
No, definitely no video. We have I've been communicated degrees, you know, when we don't, because my valley doesn't do all the 32 degrees. So quite a few of them just get communicated to us. They do the principal degrees for us. Yeah, it's kind of a bummer.
I've never heard that. Everybody I've talked to is like, yeah, it's like a weekend long thing with the Southern jurisdiction, but I can't say that anybody I've talked to has gone to the Southern jurisdiction up northwest or anything like that. Everything has just been literally south of us here in Illinois.
Okay. Yeah, I know Minnesota is Southern jurisdiction. They're next to us, and the Valley did a couple meetings, and we went there and visited them, and then they had people come visit us. We're going to be doing a show someday with Kevin Wheeler on his new book, and I have a big chart broken down of all the Scottish Rite degrees and then the translation of where they ended up in the Northern degrees. So that for another show, we will get into that for sure.
So another interesting thing here, on page 64, you mentioned that the Chinook people, I hope I'm saying that right, even though I'm Native American, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. The Chinook people had contact with white maritime traders before the Hunt and Aster party arrived. Even Lewis and Clark noted that Caucasian features in the Indians that they met. One of the features you explain is an Indian with red hair, freckles, and a tattoo that read Jack Ramsey. You go on to say that this is a story has been debated ever since it was told. how are the other stories explained? And this couldn't have been the only mention of natives with these kind of features during this time period.
Yeah, so that also was news to me. I didn't know the American or European history of exploring the whole West Coast. The Spanish were the first to come up in that area, all up California, Mexico, British Columbia, and unfortunately, they are the first ones that brought European diseases to the Native Americans of that area. And it's said that they basically wiped, that was like the first major epidemic that wiped over natives, and probably 70% at least of the population was wiped out from those waves. There was massive implications to the natives from all these ships that were coming ashore and kind of trading, and they were really there for the furs as well, but they were there 50, 100 years, multiple 100 years before the Astorian venture was there.
Right. Maybe I'm jumping a little further in the book, but you also mentioned that when they had the disease, they were taking ferries or steamships up and down the rivers, and they had to stop and kick some people off because they were getting sick.
Yeah, I mean that was when it was getting really bad, just kind of all over. And that's where the kind of the smallpox blankets ideas come from, where they knew natives were very susceptible to these diseases. You look over and you go, oh, those people are sick and they have the pox. And they knew Native Americans were just decimated by it, they being white Americans, so it was very much kind of common knowledge of that time period.
And desertion seems to be a common theme, no matter who it was, Indian or white, foreigners. They just seem like, I had enough. Some guys are like, it's just too darn cold, we can't find food.
Oh, yeah.
We're they just get up in the middle of the night and go on their own. To me, it seems illogical if it's hard enough with a group, but now you're going to desert everybody and go out on your own.
But I mean, if you've seen a native tribe or something like 20 miles back, and you're like, dude, I'm going back where the food is.
But there were tribes that they also struggled, like during the off season when the salmon weren't running, or if they weren't a very dominant tribe and they were kind of in a poor area that didn't have a lot of resources, it was a struggle. It's not like they were living in Eden a lot of times. It was like not easy living.
That's not really the easiest, harshest, best climate to be trying to survive in over there either.
Yeah, I found it amazing too that even the natives, when they got so far and they got sick of it, they didn't know what to do because they were gone from the areas that they knew.
Well, and also you talk about how some of these people that were exploring would be traveling and going and trekking in places that a lot of these tribes would be like, we don't even go there. We don't even go through those treks. Like, what are you doing? Why do you guys are there?
You guys are insane, basically. The natives were influenced or encouraged to go and do things just for gathering resources, to get food or get more horses or whatever. But these traders or these trappers were going because they were trying to get rich. That concept didn't apply to these tribes that didn't have money. They had just barter systems. So these are guys that are like, I compare them to like modern day Alaskan crab fishermen. It's a horrible job, but they're doing it because they're expecting to make a lot of money.
Hey, shout out to you, the guy who works in the crab fishing boat who does the Florida bike rides, man. I went to South Florida and got a bike ride, and one of the guys doing the thing, he's like, I'm on the Elastic Crab Show when I'm not here doing this. He's like, I just hang out on the beach the rest of the year.
Yeah.
Did Brother Aster and Brother Hunt know each other before they went on this expedition, or did they just meet each other like, oh my gosh, you're a brother. Hey, great. We're among company.
I don't think they knew each other. I think it was kind of, he was looking for suitable employees to run this company, and Hunt was the guy. And I think back then, being a Mason just kind of gave you a one-up in your community. It's not like today, in my opinion, you don't put that you're a Mason on your LinkedIn, or you don't put it on your business card. Maybe people do, but back then, if someone knew you're a Mason, it'd be like, oh man, this is great. I can trust this guy. This is my guy.
Yeah, because nowadays it seems like, oh, the first thing, man, this guy said something. It sounds kind of familiar. Are you a brother? I don't know if it worked that way back then or it was just more common. No idea. Concerning corporate takeovers, all right, the Northwest Company's takeover of this Pacific Fur Company, which was the Hunt Party's company, was in some ways considered the first corporate takeover. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what they say. I mean, I thought that was kind of just a funny thing to look at, but yeah, it was two corporations and they were both competing for the same resource, which was fur and the post. Here's a way to look at it. Blue Origin and SpaceX are competing to be the first companies to put a station on the moon, a station on the moon. Which one of those companies is going to do it first? Well, looks like SpaceX. But if SpaceX then runs out of money and Blue Origin goes there and takes over their post, then that's kind of like what this would equate to.
Okay. Yeah, because as far as I know, the East Indian Trade Company was the biggest company. So reading and hearing about these companies, and well, that's the first corporate takeover. I would have thought it would have been the East Indian Company, but there were so many offshoots of that company.
Yeah, and the Hudson Bay Company is still in existence. That's one thing I didn't know. And that was they're like the big boss monopoly of furs for that whole era. And they're still all over Canada. They operate like not convenience stores, but kind of like a Macy's.
Wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Steamships or just ships in general with the Hunt Party, they seem to have a lot of trouble with them. Well, was that common back then, or it was just their bad luck?
No, I think it's very common. I think, you got wooden ships, and again, they're hiring the best people that can do the job, and they were trying to make as much money as they could. So, for that particular series of stories, I don't know, it's pretty unbelievable, the story of the one ship that blew up. I mean, that seemed like a Hollywood story. They say it blew up from the dynamite, or the dynamite exploded, or the gunpowder barrels exploded in the ship after it was taken over by Indians on Vancouver Island.
Yeah, what a wild story.
Yeah. Talk
that
about
there could have been a movie in itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you read that part, Brock? I don't know how.
Yeah.
I was just like, wow, the balls on them to do that. But hey, if everybody's coming to kill you, why not? I mean, you're dead anyway. Why not?
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I was thinking, as I'm reading, I'm like, I can picture this, the scenes of a movie, just going through this probably being the end of the movie. But wow.
Yeah, definitely the end.
Well, I guess, at least for me, when I think of the fur traders, I just think, the guys are going out hunting, shooting, killing for pelts, and that's it. I guess you don't think about the steamships and all the other things that seem to cause them problems in the wilderness. Because
everything about it.
Yeah, like me. I mean, I wear fedoras. I got a couple of fur felt fedoras, and I'm just like, you just don't think about that when you wear them, because you only see the end product. Page 113, Pablo de Los Angeles. Los Angeles was built according to Royal Spanish regulations. I did not hear that.
Yeah, neither did I until I read that. And that pueblo is still there. It's like a couple blocks from the Staples Center where the Lakers play.
Wow.
Yeah, it's nuts. And you could walk around and you can look at actual adobe that was built before 1776.
Yeah,
incredible,
amazing thing. So, you also mentioned the 1832 rendezvous. Can you explain that?
The Native Americans knew that these rendezvous would happen, so they'd go there for trading, and then these fur trappers would all assemble and bring their traps or their pelts, and then the caravans that would be then bringing those pelts back to the States, 1,000 miles back east, would also come. And it was just this crazy month-long extravaganza of drinking and partying and gambling. And it was like, again, the crabbers come back into port in Homer. They've got a check for 30 grand, and then they blow it all, drink it all away, and then they go right back into working, and they got no money.
Sounds like the crabbers of today.
That's what I was saying. Yeah, it's like the crabbers of today.
It's crazy.
Page 124 or 125 mentioned the depletion of the buffalo. 30 million strong destroyed, just over. Not to get into environmentalism, but do you happen to know if there has been another American-made extinction like the buffalo?
I mean, certainly nothing as iconic as it, but I mean, how often do people actually see bison? You know, most people are like, oh yeah, they might as well be as far back as the woolly mammoths, you know. But it's like 100 years ago, there was tons more. 150 years ago, there were millions and millions of them.
Yeah, we were down to just 1,000 by what was it, maybe 1830s or something like that?
Well, even the beavers themselves, like in the book, it kind of explained how like beavers were everywhere, and then now you know, you think about it, you don't really see too many beavers. I guess, I don't know. Maybe you do. I don't know what the numbers are like compared to now and then, but it seemed like they were finding these things freaking everywhere.
Yeah, I think they were actually more. I don't even know. It sounds too crazy to even be true, so maybe it's not. But I think it was that there were more beavers in North America than bison. Like that's how populous they were.
Wow, we still have some bison here at the Ferma Lab, though.
Nice.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. They got a little herd of buffalo that live out there on their science property.
Really? I didn't know that. I didn't know there were any here in Illinois other than maybe at Brookfield or Lincoln Zoo. They had a couple at one time.
Oh yeah, dude, they have a huge setup at the Ferma Labs over on the side of Aurora there in Batavia, where they have the collider and all that. It's like a baby CERN.
Oh, okay. All right. I knew we had that here. I didn't know about the buffalo. Okay.
Letting the buffalo roam, man.
Yeah. Why not?
They're massive, dude. You see them. It's just so huge. And to think like back then when they had these hunting parties and they'd hunt down these buffalo, and just think of the herds of the hundreds of buffalo. It'd be wild on a hunting trip, like 10 dudes with some stuffed guns, you know, you're jamming your ammo and then taking out giant.
Those bullets they shot were like the size, they're like a little bit smaller than a golf ball.
And then you have to get that meat and the fur off there and then bring it back to where you're it's insane.
Yeah, I think it was you mentioned it, that they would just ride on the train and just start shooting buffalo, and they wouldn't even get off. They just leave them there. It was just game.
Sipping whiskey from the train car, blasting out the window with their gun.
I guess it was fun then, you know, to do it then, but the impact that it made, I obviously they couldn't see it. It just amazing. So another a lot of interesting things in your book, but can you tell me a little bit about the white man's book of heaven? The Salish Indians came to St. Louis looking for the white man's book of heaven. And why was it debated? It seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, I think somehow they were being told, or maybe they saw a copy of the Bible that Lewis and Clark brought, and I don't know the exact story. If maybe they gave it to someone, or maybe they were just making a big story out of it, but they alluded to the fact that this book was magical and powerful, which, you know, to white American culture meant very different things than what it meant to Native Americans. And so they are like, okay, we want this book, you know. And they literally on foot traversed the entire continent from basically the West Coast back to the States to meet with Lewis and Clark again and say, hey, we want to see this book. And then I think they ended up going to DC even, because they became like a spectacle when they got to the States.
Wow.
Yeah, like who are these people? We've never seen these kind of people before. Almost like,
Right.
you know, and unfortunately, it was almost like a freak show. Like, hey, look at them.
Yeah.
You know, wow, we've never
Right.
seen them before.
I mean, it was exciting times back then. I think
Yeah, right.
we think things are so cool now with like social media and you can know everything. But back then, like you're just walking down the street and you could see something like that happen and you're like, oh my God, those are two chiefs that just walked across the country to come here and get a Bible.
Well, you should tell a little bit about the traveling and about that one crazy charter and how that charter got all the way across the country, because that's an awesome story.
So there are a couple books written out here that were published under my Grand Lodge that cover this story. Basically, in 1846, there was a town called Oregon City, it predated the city of Oregon. And it was this place that it was a little small town growing, and like every town that was developing, Masons started to show up. And this just happened to be the first town that Masons assembled and said, hey, we should start a lodge out here so that we could start practicing Freemasonry. So they met in 1846, put together some money and a petition to start a lodge. You can't just create a lodge out of thin air. You have to get a dispensation from a Grand Lodge. You know, the closest Grand Lodge to Oregon at the time was Missouri. Do you put it on the, what do they call it, the Pony Express, and shoot it over there and it'll be there in a week? No, because that didn't exist. There was the only way you can get information from the West Coast back to the States was somebody had to carry it. Like there were no mailmen or anything like that. There was no trains. One guy, he was from Cincinnati. I was going to say he was from Illinois, and he's from Ohio. He just happened to be in Oregon. He was not a Mason, but he was going to return back to Cincinnati at that time. So they gave him that petition, and then he was in charge of getting it back to the States to request this new lodge. And so, you know, the journey of getting these documents from Oregon City to Cincinnati was a long journey. First, they're paddling up the Columbia River, which if you ever see the Columbia River, this is not a tame river. It's not a relaxing stroll in a canoe or anything. Like, it's a savage, mean river that will just crush you. And I don't know how they did it, but they paddled up this river for like 500 miles. And then they got out and they got on a horse, and then they rode a horse for another 1,000 miles to cover the land portion of the journey. And during that time, they're hunting and they're living day to day. It's one of the craziest things that I could imagine is nothing, you know, you just imagine looking out, it's pure wilderness. You know that there are unlimited amounts of Native Americans living in the wilderness, and some are friendly, some are going to rob you blind. You've got to get through this territory. So they made it, and that was the first leg of the journey. And so that petition was dropped off. It was given to the Grand Lodge of Missouri, and they then subsequently approved that petition. And it took a whole year for that petition to get given to someone to come back to Oregon City.
And now this part's pretty interesting, because who was some of the people that brought this back and how it was brought back and exchanged as well, even, right? Because that, when I seen some of these names, I seen Kellogg, I'm like, wait, what? Is this the same? Oh, yeah. It is the same guy. Oh, what?
Yeah, so there's a young Mason. I think he was only 19 years old. So, you know, this is a time period where there's nothing we can imagine that compares to it. Okay, you can imagine the United States as being this place where opportunity is not that good unless you're like in a city. And if you're not in a city, you're a farmer. And if you're a farmer, you're probably pretty poor. And then on top of that, if you live in a city, there's disease everywhere. Like, you are living in unclean conditions and you're sick all the time. And there's this new opportunity for Americans to go to this place called Oregon Country, which was this newly opened area where there was land available to start farming. And people thought of it as this just beautiful, disease-free place that they could go and start a new life. But to do that, they had to sell everything they owned, buy a wagon, or at worst, join a wagon party and walk. And that's the craziest thing that I never knew about the Oregon Trail is most of the people that made that journey walked it. They weren't on a horse or sitting relaxing in the back of this wagon. They were walking 2,000 miles.
And like that was why the wagon ride is, we're not talking roads here. This is going across fields and wild stuff.
Yeah, rocks.
Yeah,
rivers. I don't know. Did you guys play Oregon Trail as kids?
Oh yeah.
Played it or died trying to play it? Every time
right.
I played
I had dysentery a few times.
Yeah.
Get a couple miles and you died of dysentery.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's the classic story. Like it was hard. People died on the journey. Like your dad could die, your sister could die, your wife could die, and then you just kept going. Like it's hard times. And so back to your question, the guy that got the actual charter to deliver to Oregon City was a Mason. He was 19 years old. He was actually a lot like the guy, John Jacob Aster. He was just a young, enterprising Mason that was just like, I'm going to go start a new life and find more opportunity out there in Oregon. It's alleged that he was captured by Indians on the journey. I think he like bluffed his way out of being captivated by them. And this is a kind of I didn't put this in the book because I was like, I don't know if this is like a tall tale that he made up. But there's a book, an autobiographical book about him that you can find on Google Books. And he says that he was captured by these Indians and he bluffed this whole story that like the army was coming and they were going to rescue him. And they were like, oh, shoot, we better let him go. And so they got away. But he still got shot in the leg with an arrow, apparently. And then he said, apparently he walked with a limp for the rest of his life from that interaction.
Wow.
So yeah, 2,000 miles. It took 6 months to cross that terrain. And then while they're crossing the Oregon Trail, they reached this place near Boise, Idaho, where it was a trading fort. And gold had just been discovered in California. So this guy who was going to Oregon City to deliver this, he wasn't going just to deliver the charter. He just happened to be the guy that was given that. He said, I don't really want to go to Oregon anymore. I'm going to California. So he gives the charter to these other Masons he had met along the way, and they are the ones who delivered the charter. And the trunk that they, it was basically like a safe. They put this charter in this beautiful safe, and that safe is still owned by the Grand Lodge of Oregon, and you can see it if you ever go there. It's an amazing piece of like Americana and certainly Masonic artifact.
You have it in your book, right? I think I just came across it for the page.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's very, very cool. I've got to open it and look in it and all that.
Wow.
How brotherly is that of a Mason? Man, I'm going there. I'm going to bring this charter. Wait, I got a job opportunity. I got to take care of myself. Here, you guys take this from me, would you?
See you later.
Hey,
it was probably like Marty out there, and he's like, "Oh, charter! Somebody's got a chart, giving a charter away. I'll take the charter for you somewhere."
Yeah, our other host Marty, every time he hears of a charter, he wants to form a new Masonic body, and he gets everybody.
Oh, nice.
Gets everybody hyped on. We're all going to revive this new dead Masonic order.
Oh man, more power to him.
Oh yeah. He loves
Freemasonry, one charter at a time.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So was that the Kellogg's family's trunk, right?
Yeah, Joseph Kellogg, and who knows whatever else he had in there? Maybe birth certificates or
box of cereal,
cornmeal.
Yeah.
One thing, a lot of people that I learned, and this goes back to my original thing I said, if I was digging through my safe of my lodge, and the thing that people brought with them when they left the West Coast to come to the East Coast to come to the West Coast, is they would get a demit from their lodge, and that demit was their new passport. Whenever they settled in a new town, they would take that demit to a lodge and say, here's my demit. I would like to join your lodge. And that would be their in to that new community.
Amazing.
Yeah.
The real social network.
Totally. And like a social passport that could establish you in a place you've never been and you don't know a soul. Which, can you imagine the value of that?
Yeah, absolutely. It totally reminds me of a story that me and Wes, as I talked to you earlier, we went to the Valley of Madison for a reunion. And I believe that's where their Grand Lodge meets. I'm not exactly sure. So it's been a Masonic building for a very, very long time. When people would go to Wisconsin and travel and they were Masons, one of the first things they would do is stop at the Masonic Temple, and they had their own like private bank there, so Masons could bring their money and leave it at the safe in the depository there at the lodge and do whatever they were going to do, and know they could keep coming back like a bank and get their money, or they'd leave their prized possessions that they would be traveling with in this gigantic safe room. And it was like, well, man, look at that. That's why, you'd see that there's that old joke of like, oh, well, first the town is built, and then they build the bar, the jail, then they build the bank and the Masonic Lodge. And you're like, oh, all right.
The church, the saloon, the brothel, and the lodge.
Yeah. It seemed to be one of the staples of every one of these small settlement cities all around the United States.
Yeah, get the important things out of the way first.
Yeah.
Some bars were churches for some people. Yeah.
Hey, look at most Masonic lodges where usually it started in the tavern.
Yeah.
So
who was Kit Carson, and what was the duel he was famous for?
Man, Kit Carson was another amazing guy, a Mason. He was known as the scout for John Fremont, who was an amazing explorer and map maker who heavily is responsible for why we settled the whole West Coast, why Mexico didn't why the Mexican state or country is not all of California. So John Fremont, was charged with mapping all of that area, which then led to the Oregon Trail opening up. Kit Carson was the scout who helped to lead those journeys, those expeditions of John Fremont. And he learned about it. The reason he was a scout is because he was a fur trapper for quite a few years before that.
Yeah, didn't they just like meet up with him while he was out with another company or in between contracts or something like that?
Oh, yeah. Like these guys, he was a true badass. I mean, lived just totally day to day. I've actually been to his house. He has an adobe house in this cool little town, and it's actually his house. You can go there and walk through it, and it's a museum run by a Mason, of course. And so the duel you asked about was, I think it was drunken duel at a rendezvous. So back to the idea of the fur trappers rendezvous, he got into a duel, and memory is foggy of it, but maybe you can refresh my memory on.
Yeah, it was at a duel. I forget. Somebody said something to him, obviously, and I am, trying to look for it. Let me see if
I mean, they used to do that kind of stuff back in the day. You would get the call, and somebody wanted. It wasn't just a debate. It was like, dude, this is a duel, man. Only one of these is gonna get out of here.
Yeah, and probably the community was like, yeah, we're sick of this crap. Figure this out so we can be done with it.
Because he ended up shooting. I don't think he ended up killing the guy, but he ended up scaring the out of him.
Yeah. And obviously he didn't die, so yeah, he must have been the victor.
And I think he was only, if I remember correctly, he was like 22 or 25 or something like that, maybe even younger at the time.
Yeah, the duel's got to be the young man's game for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, he was only 25 years old in the duel. Legend. Yeah, he was. 25.
I also got to hold his rifle at the Santa Fe Masonic Lodge. Very cool experience.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Most of the trappers and traders of the mountains were here. As Indians. Yeah, I don't want to like read through the whole chapter to I mean, it was pretty good. I mean,
yeah.
I think there was a picture of it. So if you find the painting, that it should be on the same page.
Yeah, there's one above it. It says Alfred Jacob Miller, 1810 through 74. Greeting the trappers. I don't think that's it.
So I kind of have an off-topic situation, but kind of So when these guys were exploring and they came across these port cities, is there any word of like how big, or was there roads or building structures? Does it refer to anything of like, were there Native American cities, like, or were most of these tribes, migrating tribes like teepees and, home built house, or was it like actual firm structures and, like a society?
So it totally depends on the tribe, but I'll say the Salish tribes, so that's like Puget Sound where I live here in the Seattle area. They were seasonally in different areas. Certain times of year they had longhouses, which were permanent structures that were built all out of cedar. They were just these big log, basically buildings that they would inhabit and do their ceremonies and potlucks and all that stuff there. But if you would then, let's say you go to the Plains Indians, which were like the Blackfoot, the tribes that lived off the bison population, they were totally nomadic. So they moved with the bison.
Yeah, see, that's more of what, like here in the Midwest, that's more of our familiar thing with,
Right.
There's certain bluffs and stuff where they would use caves and do ceremonies there, and there's markings, and they had spots and valleys that they kind of worked out of, or mostly like river valleys pretty much and stuff like that. Yeah, just thinking of how different all the different Native American cultures, it made me think like, man, were there like full cities out there as these guys are getting out there and exploring, or even you came across some of the guys during the exploring were French as well. How many French people were also exploring out there that you don't really hear that or think about? Like, dude, there was like 70% of these people out here exploring were like French people as well. Like, and like you're saying, the Spanish were there before them. So there's a dude on YouTube who talks about vintage menus from like the 1800s and stuff, and he reviews old menus and talks about like the stuff that they would eat and what's on the menu. Some of the ones from way back in the 1800s, they would have stuff like beaver and buffalo and the stuff that they would hunt in there. But the cuisines and stuff, there was a lot of French food and a lot of stuff in these where he's reading these things being like, well, this should have been the gold rush, or this should have been when people are doing this, and this is what's happening. Just based on their menus, you can tell what kind of culture and people are actively in that area. So it was just so wild to see the different cuisines that people were eating.
Totally.
And like, oh, well, these people were actually everywhere. When you think Oregon Trail or how these people were traveling, you don't really think of the immigrants from all around the world that were actually coming to America and settling different parts of land before it was the United States.
Yeah, so the fur era and the gold rush encompass basically 1800 to 1850. So that's not very long. And the French were totally the first to like establish the fur trade in the United States or the North America. As the fur animal population started to dwindle, these guys started to lose their employment. It's like the equivalent of, I don't know, somebody in an industry where the jobs are just disappearing, like working for Boeing, and they're just not making as many jets. So like, where are you going to go? You got to go to something else.
Yeah.
So these French fur trappers would retire and either become farmers or merchants or whatever. But yeah, that's where they came from. They were just former fur trappers.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. And you see and when you look at some of the old cities and you see some of those old photographs from say San Francisco from the Gold Rush or Seattle and stuff, some of those first big buildings that were constructed and built, and you're like, man, how in the world did they build these buildings back then? They're just so huge. But you don't think like you just said, you have all these people who moved out there doing fur trade, and that's not out there anymore. And now you have a town, you have a city where you've built a bank, you have a bar, so more people are showing up looking for that, that we're going to hit the fortune, we're going to get, and then you ended up having a lot of people around to build and to construct things. And if that's the only thing in town is to turn the trees into lumber to construct a city, and that's what Aster is paying people to do, that's going to be your job. Right. So cities start constructing and the buildings are, it's really cool to see how some of that stuff was constructed and how big these cities grew and how fast they did. Because I don't remember one of the cities, when you did your presentation, I remember you showed like a progression, and it was like a small few cabins, and then 40 years later, there's buildings everywhere, and you're like, holy smokes, that is a full functioning, like 20,000 person city when this was just a camp, 40 years before.
Yeah, I mean, the story of San Francisco is a good example of that. The gold rush started to spur it on. Just looking at it Masonically, there was one lodge in San Francisco in like 1850. By 1855, there was like 50 lodges. It was explosive growth. The lodges were so cool. The way they would kind of signify themselves is they would name themselves from where those people came from. So there's like a New Jersey lodge in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Different parts of the country are named, the lodges are named after where they came from.
Well, that's similar to here. We have Batavia, New York. A group of people came here and formed in Batavia, Illinois. That's how they formed. And even the Masonic lodges and stuff, like they were all connected. And like in a way, city, I know here in Aurora, we have like a city in Mexico. It's like our sister city, where a lot of the population from there that has moved to Aurora from Mexico. So, it's like a sister city because of how much population they share and the culture and customs and, all of that kind of stuff. So you definitely see that around in these older cities too. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I found that story. I know we've gone on about that, and but it's still
with the facts.
It's still pretty interesting. All right. Concerning Carson's famous gun duel in 1835, a hunter named Joseph Schounard, I believe it's pronounced, mounted his horse with a loaded rifle and challenged any Frenchman, American, Spaniard, or Dutchman to fight him in single combat. Kit Carson told him if he wished to die, he would accept the challenge. Carson mounted his horse and with a loaded pistol rushed into close contact, and both almost at the same time instantly fired. Carson's ball entered Schounard's hand, came out at the wrist, and passed through the arm above the elbow. Schounard's ball passed over the head of Carson, and while he went for another pistol, Schounard begged for his life that it might be spared. Carson was only 25 at the time of this duel, and the legend stuck with him for the rest of his life.
Yeah. Pretty sweet.
Yeah, you got to be ballsy to do that. I mean, most 25-year-olds nowadays aren't going to do that.
If you want to die, I'll do it. If you want to die today, let's do it.
Yeah.
Pretty.
Yeah, it's what a wild time. Sometimes I wonder, how did we survive? Our egos, as people are just outstanding.
Yeah,
it's pretty amazing.
I mean, survival of the fittest, man. That's the only way I can make sense of it back then.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you hear of it nowadays. It's different than back then. I mean, you don't get people on horses nowadays. Yeah, there's still gun shooting, but it's not like that. It's just not like that. All right. Who is the trapper Joseph Walker?
Trapper Joseph Walker.
Page 147. Let's see, I don't know if you recognize.
Oh yeah. He's another one of those OG trappers that just everyone respected, and I don't believe he was a Mason, but he was just extremely respected and kind of that era of The Revenant, the movie The Revenant.
Oh yeah, I mean, I bet there'd be guys like that come into the tavern, and the city would be like, dude, that guy is a bad mother. I've heard.
Yeah.
Like,
oh yeah,
this guy's wearing a bear claws and necklace. And
yeah.
It seemed like he was very sought after among the companies, because if I remember what I looked up on Wikipedia, he went back and forth with whoever had the best contract for him at the time. I don't know if that was the same thing for everyone else that was a fur trapper, but his popped up that he was very famous for that.
Yeah, like if once you become like a leader and you're just you're a seasoned veteran of expeditions, because it was seasonal. Like again, if you go back to comparing it to a normal modern day crabber, it's like getting a captain of a ship versus a deckhand. You pay a lot of money for a seasoned, experienced captain, and that's what that guy was.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't see anything that if he was a brother. I don't recall seeing it in the book, so I wasn't sure if he was. I know a lot of people kept it secret for whatever reason, but
Right.
it would be a big surprise. Manifest Destiny. What is that? I come across it in your book from 1843 to 1844, an expedition that accelerated, and that movement was known as Manifest Destiny. And everybody says that phrase,
Manly P.
but
Hall
I don't know if
talks
they
about
really
in
know
his
what
book.
it means.
Honestly, I didn't really know what it was till I researched it. It's basically American propaganda to move west. You know, it was kind of like thing that was put out to encourage Americans to expand the destiny of America to the Pacific coast. That's basically what it was. And they had, I think the image I included with the book is the woman carrying a bunch of stuff kind of across the continent. And that was the image for it, just showing like, you know, we need to carry the vision of America all the way to the Pacific Ocean, because if we don't, the English could be over there, the Russians could take it over, or the Spanish, which AKA now is Mexico.
Well, and that's kind of hits back to what we talk about, these Masons who take up that frontier, you know, and that's kind of I don't remember exactly what, but like in the Manly P. Hall book, he talks about the Manifest Destiny and about how the plan of America and like the goddess Columbia and like establishing the Americanism across the whole country and unifying it, like almost as I don't even know how you would say it, magically claiming the land, but like I don't even know what you would call it, almost like conquering America is like the under goal of that, but just saying it in the most nicest terms possible.
Yeah.
While also giving people the hope of creating their dreams. And you know, you came all the way from a foreign country to America and you heard all these great things to start a new life, and you know, all the hope and success you can have, and then to actually take that, and then you get here and then you're like, well, actually it's not just here in New York City, you actually have to take that a little further west, and that opportunity still exists like it did here. This is established civilization, and you got to keep pushing that and pushing that frontier of finally conquering America and what, you know, they deem the manifest destiny of the full creation. And just think of it, they never had the Louisiana Purchase, all these weird things that just randomly happen that you're like, man, America would have been completely different.
Yeah, and the Louisiana Purchase was Jefferson's, who was not a Mason, but he should have been a Mason because he was such an incredible guy, visionary and extremely brilliant. Yeah, that's totally his gift that he gave to us, is that he made that happen.
And think, you know, like, well, I mean, like, look at Canada. When you go to certain parts of Canada and you see how French it is, and you're like, wow, that could have been America. That could have been us. Yes. Like, it was that close.
Yeah, and it solidified our place as one of the most safest, resource-rich, and defensible countries in the world.
Yeah, and that was another cool thing. As the military went out there and they built these star forts and the cool trading posts and all the different forts that were built and stuff. It's really cool to kind of see how they really did just walk, you know, establishing stuff all the way across the United States. Absolutely amazing. What do you have any plans to write any books in the future, or are you studying up on anything else or researching anything, or?
Not currently. So this book took me like 3 full years. I want to say it was longer, but I think it was just 3 years. It was a hell of a lot of energy and time, and
I bet time. I mean, it is just the stories and the pictures and the paintings and stuff that you found for reference, and the people's lives and the journeys, and like you said, the places you visited, even fully cement the story is absolutely amazing. I would definitely read another book for sure.
Well, cool. I learned a lot in it. One of the things I learned is you write a book, and that's only half the journey. The other half is promoting the book. And, you know, so that's kind of what I've essentially done. But, you know, it's Freemasonry. So it's like, I'm doing it for free, traveling. Some lodges don't understand, like, you know, I'm not going to fly myself somewhere else to speak at their lodge. Like, it's got to be like the lodge. Should be a Masonic custom to pay for it.
Yeah, I know a few brothers that, you know, as long as you pay the travel fees, they'll come out and do the speaking, you know, and do that for free. But it's like, yeah, getting around, plane tickets, and to be there, it's expensive. Can you tell us a little bit? Do you visit lodges, and like, you know, how many speaking engagements have you done with the book, or how do people contact you to get you, you know, anything like that, if you want to plug anything, how lodges reach out to you or other valleys or anybody,
Sure. Yeah. So the funny thing is, I spoke at a lot of lodges when the book came out, and it came out before COVID and all that. COVID kind of shut it all down, but I've spoken at least 50 lodges, and I've spoken at least 10 different states. And I kind of got to the point where I was like, I think I'm done for a while of doing this. Like I'm burned out on it. And then Deb reached out, and I was like, okay, this seems different. Like this is a real bona fide city. This is not like going to just some random place. And so I was like, this sounds really cool. I'm definitely in for this. I was blown away by the level of preparation that they put into it.
They do it right at the Valley of Chicago for sure. Every event they do, the food's great, the decorations, and the cool part is they have a really cool new archivist as well that is pretty new out there, and she used to work for I think like one of the museums in St. Charles or something like that for their city museum. And so
I met her.
Yeah, so she does a really cool job on bringing like authentic artifacts that from all over. So like when you came out, they brought so many authentic like timepiece guns and weapons, so many stuff that they lend from other museums and stuff out of private collections to put on display for people to see, and for you to kind of, it helps you wrap your head around it when you see the weapons and the tins they were eating out of, and kind of the barbed wire and the old school stuff, and how it's just not made and done the same way as it is today. And it's when you see the stuff and hear the stories, it really resonates with you. And they do a great job over there.
I will totally echo that, and I'll say the stories I've told since I've come back to my lodge and my Scottish Rite brothers here, as I said, the Scottish Rite Valley is the greatest valley I've ever been to. Like, by far the nicest building. And also it's when you imagine what Freemasonry could be like and should be like, you guys are doing it. Like, it's that good.
It's some of the events, when you see 250 people come out to an event, you're like, oh wow, that's awesome. You guys are doing something.
Yeah, we are a very blessed valley. For me, I thought, oh, this is a normal thing for valleys. I guess it's not. And I was really surprised by that. But, I guess it really depends on where your valley is. We're just lucky to have the influx of membership every reunion, and to have them come back, and whether it's for degrees or just a brotherhood night, come back out. We're very lucky to have that here in Chicago. So if you do another book, what would the subject be about, whether it's masonry or not?
I would have to just build off of where I ended, which is 1850, because I think there's just and I would have to shrink it. It would be 1850 to 1875, because so much happened during that time. It deserves a book for sure. I think I'll have to be retired for that to come to fruition.
Well, okay. What has been the best thing about traveling around promoting your book?
Oh man, absolutely meeting brothers like you guys that I never would have met otherwise. It's like, as cheesy as it sounds, like that's 100% what it is. I've met guys down in the LA area, Los Angeles, that I've become good friends with, the Bay Area, Colorado, New Mexico, and they're just memories that I'll never forget. It's just so cool how this fraternity is.
And this is your one and only book, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So what advice would you give anybody out there that's looking to write their own book and get it published, whether through a publisher or self-published?
Well, for one, putting together the outline was a big part, and I knew I had something with the outline. Fortunately, my Grand Lodge sponsored the publication of the book. So that will be first and foremost. Talk to your Grand Lodge and see if they will support you in any way. Secondly, which this is something I didn't do, even though I thought it was going to be done, and I don't want to put any blame on anybody except for myself, really, that I wish I had gotten a proofreader before publishing it. So I've edited this book literally a dozen times. And after a certain point, you're like, I'm done with this. Like, you're just like, take it. I never want to look at it again. Like, it was so exhausting. And, you know, now I've tried to read it since it's been published, and I'm like, all I see is errors and typos and stuff like that. And I'm like, God, I should have just paid, you know, $1,000 of my own money to get it proofread and get the last gloss added to it. That's kind of my only thing. And I could totally get it edited now with my publisher, but
yeah, when you stare at something every day for 3 years and it's all you're thinking about silently, and then you're writing it down and from thought to thought, like I know when you're reading Morals and Dogma, you can see where Albert Pike put down the pencil and did something else and came back and started again.
Oh, totally.
You're like, oh, okay, he's on a tear right here.
Yeah.
Well, heck, even with just our little memes, I've got to send it to these guys a couple times because even with spell check, I'm things up. I'm just like,
Oh yeah. I don't know if you guys know who Rick Rubin is. He's like a famous music producer. He's got a big beard, and he produced like Beastie Boys and Red Hot Chili Peppers. He's like a total guru music producer. But he said something that comforted me. He's like, I never ever go back and look at or review my old work. It's done and I move on.
Yeah, I think Johnny Depp's like that too. He doesn't watch any of his movies. He's never seen any of his acting, like even edited or portrayed in any way.
Weird. Yeah, that's crazy. For a guy like that, that's surprising.
Yeah, well, he probably says that and actually watches everything, I'm sure.
Right. Yeah.
So what kind of advice other than getting a proofreader would you give somebody that's trying to write their book?
Find something that's really interesting. And I think the fact of the matter is there is an appetite for Masonic literature. In my opinion, there's so much stuff out there that's just kind of like opinion, you know, people voicing an opinion about Masonry, and it's like, okay, but if you tell facts and you do the actual historical research and then don't add any fluff to it and just tell it based on the sources you find, it's amazing. You know, like,
oh yeah,
there's got to be hundreds of stories like my book that are out there that could be written about other Masons that are just totally inspiring.
Well, I was going to say, every single lodge has got a closet or a safe or somewhere with old books and old minutes and old things. It's just amazing to see. We just had our town's local like historical society. They did some research on our lodge building and the history of Freemasonry, and on what was it, Wes, exactly? We are the oldest fraternal relation.
Yeah, non-religious fraternal relations organization in the county of. Was it county or?
Yeah. I think of the county in the area, and we sponsored all kinds of crazy stuff that the lodge helped out with the city and stuff, or the brothers, you know, would help out with the city. It was absolutely amazing, and you think every single city, every lodge has that just waiting in a safe in a book somewhere for somebody to discover, and to discover that brother who made it all happen.
Totally. And we live in a day and age where you could find information in seconds. Like, you don't got to go to the library. That's what I did initially. Was I just found a name, Google it. Oh my God, he's a Mason. And this happened over and over and over. You just literally need to type in their name and comma Freemason. See if anything comes up, and it oftentimes it does. Anyone that wants to write a book, how about just do the research to do a presentation for your lodge first, see how it's received, and if you enjoy it, start building off it, see what happens.
That's absolutely amazing. Yeah, great advice.
Is that how this started for you? Or like, I'll do a presentation, lodge education, and it just expanded into
totally. And then, like, you know, every lodge in the area then contacts you, and you're like, oh yes, I'll go give this talk at this lodge. You know, it's like,
that's what brings me to lodges, though. When I hear somebody's gonna got somebody there, or somebody educational or some, it's rare to see a good educational bit at a lodge meeting nowadays where you're like, oh, you guys have education there? Oh, I'll be there, and a dinner for free. Oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah, it's sure not reading the minutes and hashed over crockpot food that is bringing
exactly right.
Spaghetti.
Yeah,
The frozen lasagna.
Yeah, or pizza or something like that. So one other thing, maybe more a little bit on a personal note, how you said you're married. How did your wife feel about you producing this book?
Oh, she was super proud. Yeah, totally behind me on it. I'll say this, I think she was glad for me to be done because my office was just ridiculous books. I mean, I had all my sources all over the place, notes everywhere. It was like a madman's lair for 2 years. And so I was like, Carrie, I'm finally packing all this crap up and moving it out the garage. And then it became a clean, normal office. And she definitely appreciated that.
Well, that's good, honey. Can you take out the trash while you're doing that too?
Well, I was like, you're probably hitting her with all the facts, like, "Oh, honey, you don't even believe what I just read today. Do you know what happened? I don't care what happened in 18.
Oh yeah,
man, like,
yeah. How many eye rolls did you get?
all the. I mean, just the same as you guys. Like, you tell your wife about anything with masonry, and they're like, okay. And with this, she'd be like, "Oh, what'd you read today? Did you read that?" Brother Joseph plowed the field again for the 37th time. It's like, no. Like, it was about a duel, like, this is about a guy that got scalped. He got his head chopped off.
He was scalped. Yeah.
I picture it. I know this is showing my age, like Superman 2 when the kid's like playing at Niagara Falls. Look at me, Mom. She's like, yeah, that's nice, dear. Whatever. Leave me alone.
Yeah. No, yeah, she was super supportive and proud of me, and it was great.
I bet, man. I bet it takes a lot there's so much research and so much stories. I couldn't even imagine. Yeah, it's just just consuming. How much information and research you did. It's very impressive.
And honestly, sometimes I forget I even wrote a book. Like, someone will say, "Oh yeah, you're an author." I'll be like, "Oh yeah." I mean, that's, I guess, what I am because I published a book. I don't identify as an author, but I wrote a book. It's a book I'm proud of, and I actually had a dream always to write a book. So it was something I always kind of wanted to do.
Well, I enjoyed reading it a lot. If not, I wouldn't have done this interview with you. I was, very fascinated by all the stories in it, and just like, wow. It's just not something you're going to learn in lodge unless you read the book or do the research on your own.
You're not going to hear about it. That's like something you would watch in an old historical documentary, like some of these facts. When have you heard? You just don't, or like he was talking about the Canadian school system teaches some of this stuff, but we don't. It's like half the stuff we don't teach it, or nobody know. You won't know it unless you read the book or you do the research yourself. In other words, it's kind of hard to know what happened back like in the early 1800s in America, where you didn't think it was even a full functioning society there. It's just it's mind blowing, how all that was developed and founded. It's just insane.
Yeah, the big thing that kind of takes up all the air, I guess you could say, or gravity of the 1800s is the Civil War. Everyone knows about the Civil War.
Yeah,
but it's like there was so much stuff that happened before the Civil War in the 1800s that we just kind of brush over.
Yeah, that's a big piece of American history that's just glossed over because of the Civil War. So where would you prefer people to buy your book? I mean, I'll put the Amazon link up, but if you have, another preferred way.
No, Amazon is like totally the most convenient. And I mean, I don't have a supply of them and my publisher doesn't. So Amazon is the way to go.
Okay, great. I'll throw the link up either now, and it'll definitely be in the description so everyone can go grab it.
Cool.
One more thing, we usually do shout out and shots out at the end of our episodes. So if you have a glass of water or not, if you want to give somebody a shout out.
All right. I'll give a shout out to my brother, Patrick Free.
Patrick Free. Well, brother,
Kyle, I should have grabbed a beer before the recording. That's
I only got
I'm drinking water.
I only got a glass of wine, so no.
Oh, wine, fancy.
Yeah, I didn't feel like going out and get them. bottle of whiskey. So
I see you got some white wine, man. Keep your teeth from staining up.
yeah, just the week I had, I didn't feel like driving. So, well, thank you for coming on the show. And if you're ever in Chicago again, we would love to meet you in person, and maybe even sign a copy of your book or two.
Oh yeah, Wes, look at this. I got mine signed.
Yeah, I know. Yep. I was a little jealous I couldn't make it out that night. So.
Yeah, I'm like, someday, man, somebody's gonna look through my library and be like, man, all these books are signed. This is awesome.
All right. Well, we won't keep you any longer. Again, thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much.
It. I'll let you know when the episode comes out. I got a bunch of editing I got to get to. So, thank you for being a great sport, brother.
I was like, we wanted to do this interview now for a few months now. We've been talking about it for months on months. So
no,
it's nice
perfect.
to crush it out.
No, I really appreciate you guys having me on, and it's great chatting with you, and got me energized and excited again about the book. And it's just kind of evidence of the book lives on, and I really appreciate your guys' support about the book and interest in it.
Yeah, I hope it sparks some interest in people, and they go out and do the research, or even just Google a couple of the guys that we talked about and just go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, I'll let you know when it's scheduled to come out. If you want to look at it, before it gets released or something, that's up to you. But it pretty much is just going to be this with a couple bleeps, and I'll add some things in there. So.
Oh yeah, you do you.
All right, will do. Thank you, and you have a good night.
Yeah, thanks, guys. You too.
Absolutely, thank you. Great talking to you again. Have a good one.
Yeah, you guys too. All right, take care.